So if you want, check out some Maria Schneider for her backgrounds and the way she shapes a solo, right? She just is incredible at just giving a soloist the right amount of direction and yet the right amount of freedom and letting it just create a whole world in itself. Hey Rangers, I hope you guys are all doing great. I am looking forward to checking out your in-heads. Yeah, I'm excited to see them. Please, I'm going to give you feedback as soon as I can on them, and please check out the feedback and feel free to email me throughout the week. I think that does make the creative process go a lot smoother for you all if we have some communication, just to make sure you're on the right track and I'm answering all the questions that I'm sure are inevitably coming up as you work through this. For this next week, the assignment is to do the solo sections. So the assignment is solo changes and backgrounds. And that is going to be due on Monday, February 15th. And all of the charts, so here are kind of the guidelines for this class. All of the charts must have at least 2 solos. And all of the charts must incorporate backgrounds on at least one of the solos. So in this video, I'm gonna break down those 2 components. One is solo changes, and the other is backgrounds. So let's start with solo changes. So that's referring to the chord progression that the soloist plays over. Now, probably the most common solo changes is just the same chord changes as the main melody of the tune, as the head. So that's pretty typical, but I would encourage you not to take it for granted as that's how it has to be. It doesn't, and it's oftentimes more effective for you to have different changes on your improvisation than on your head. Probably most often the solo changes will, if they're not the same as what's on the head, they'll often be similar. But sometimes we might just alter them to make them more manageable for the improviser. A lot of times the chord changes might really work well with the specific melody of the tune, but might not leave a lot of freedom for the soloist. So sometimes we might be altering phrase lengths or maybe sitting on one chord change for a little longer. That might be one reason that we would alter the chord changes from what's in the head. Another reason we might do it is to create a sense of variety in the chart. We might want the chord progression to be even more varied. So for instance, if we have 2 different solos, as you will, you can have both of the soloists improvising over the same chord changes, but you might have one soloist improvise over one set of chord changes, and then the second soloist improvise over a different set of chord changes. This is going to allow you to create more variety in the chart, so that can add more shape to the chart. You can have 2 different feeling types of solos. We're balancing expectation and surprise. So it adds more surprise when we do that, because people are going to probably be expecting the same kinds of chord changes we've been hearing to continue. So that can be nice. The downside is sometimes we can lose some of the sense of coherence and freedom that comes with just having one set of chord changes that everyone plays over and over again. So it's a balance. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. But the only thing that you can do wrong is not give it any thought. You want to be thoughtful about it. You don't want to just take for granted that whatever people play on the head is what you're stuck with for solos for the rest of the tune. You want to give it some thought and make sure that, yes, I actually want to be improvising over these same chord changes that are on the head. So, give it some thought. There, I can think of other reasons specific to the song why a person might use a different set of chord changes for the improvisations than the head. So you just want to give it some thought. I'm going to give you a couple different examples of what it is, how you can have two different sets of chord changes for the different solos, and how that can help shape the song. And these are both charts of mine that I sent out scores for last week. One is Winter Machine, and one is Jesse's song. So you can check the scores on those. But let's start with, we're just going to listen to the solo sections in part, just the parts of the solo sections on these tunes. So the first one is the song Winter Machine. And the trumpet solo, what I went with was a 16-bar blues and just made it like hard swinging 16-bar minor blues, basically. And so, it's coming from a tune that's had kind of a shuffle, and it's also had kind of an Afro-Cuban 12/8, but it hasn't really just like dug in with a walking bass line up until this point. So to me, that was like a really nice way to create a certain vibe. But then after the trumpet solo, I had it go into an alto sax solo, which brings back that Afro-Cuban 12/8 feel and is more of a vamp. It's kind of a worked out vamp. It's staying on a certain set of 4 bars for 4 times, and then it goes on to some other chords. But it's a more modal type of solo. And I think leads back nicely into the melody. So it creates some variety. One thing, when you do have everybody soloing over the same chord progression, what can often happen is, first of all the soloists can tend to take their solos in the same direction. They certainly don't have to, but that's something that they're going to have to fight to make sure that not all the solos are the same. And then also, it can get very predictable for the audience. It's easy for us to start tuning out solos. If you've ever been to a jam session and you're hearing everybody play rhythm changes, and by the 17th soloist over rhythm changes, it's like it doesn't really matter what they play at that point. You've just kind of been hearing the same 32 bars over and over again. So by having 2 different sets of solo changes, you can really work to mitigate some of that. Okay, so here is the trumpet solo on Winter Machine. And then we'll hear the saxophone solo. Okay. So that's kind of the idea of how I made the trumpet solo feel. And then here is, I'm going to jump to the alto saxophone solo, which comes Let me see where. About 3:45. Okay, so here's the end of the trumpet solo into the alto sax solo. All right. So that's one example. Another example is the song Jesse's Song, which I also sent a score of last week. And the first solo on it is a piano solo, and it has backgrounds in the horns. And you'll hear it's kind of it's similar in terms of what the horns are doing is kind of taking an idea from the main melody of the tune and using it as a background and playing that, and the piano kind of vamps over that. So it keeps a kind of, it's meant to keep a sort of quiet energy. Whereas the tenor saxophone solo, which comes after it, there's like a little transition section in between the piano solo and the tenor sax solo, where it's the horns playing real loud for 8 bars and a little transition, and then the tenor solo. And the tenor solo is more modal and more energetic. And instead of having more frequent chord changes, it sits on one chord for like, it'll be like 2 or 4 bars for each chord. So it gets a real different sort of vibe. And again, it's about how do you shape the overall tune. Think how different it would be if I just took like the chord progression of the head to Jesse's Song and just, put repeats around it and said, okay, everybody blow. Like it would not have this effect. So anyway, we'll listen to it, and we'll just listen to it straight in from the piano solo all the way through to the tenor solo. So let's see. I just gotta get it to a good spot. So, yeah, so that is an example of having two different sets of solo chord changes for different solos throughout a tune and how it can really help shape your chart. You don't have to do that. You just have to give it some thought. So, make your default setting be that the solo changes are something you have to think about beyond just the head. I would like generally for your charts for this class have two separate solo sections written out. They can be identical, right? You can photocopy, but I want to be able to look at two separate sets of solo changes. So even if and for you to be able to look at that, when we go to make the final charts, we can figure out how to make it visually most accommodating to the instrumentalists. We'll talk about that when we get to putting all this stuff together. But right now, you want to have that freedom to be able to think of having something, a transition happen in between the solos. Yeah, do that. Okay, so that's solo changes. Okay, that's the chord changes that we're talking about. The second aspect of this is that you need to have backgrounds for your solos. So that means the horns are playing some kind of figure underneath the soloist. They're doing something to accompany them. Now, I'll say this, in real life, not all solos have to have backgrounds. There's no background gods that determine that all solos require them. But for the purposes of our class, I want everyone to write some backgrounds for at least one of the solos, and possibly both solos. So let's first talk about how backgrounds function. The first thing they can do is they can build energy in a solo or shape the mood, so it could be a textural idea, but it's going to add character to what's happening with the solo. It's going to kind of shape the direction that the solo might take. It's going to be giving the soloist something to improvise off of, could give them some inspiration, some direction. And we have to be careful. We don't want to do something that's going to step on the soloist. But it's at the same time, we want to be giving them something so that they can react to it. So another thing that backgrounds can do is remind us of the thematic material in other parts of the chart, from the main melody, or if there's certain melodic motifs that have occurred earlier in the chart, we can bring them back in the backgrounds, and that can add a lot of unity and coherence to the chart. For instance, like with the Jesse song thing that we were just listening to, in the piano solo, this piano solo wasn't happening over the exact chord changes of the main tune, but the backgrounds were based on the melody of the main tune. And so that added a certain sense of unity and even development of that melody to the solo. And then the last thing that backgrounds can do, and this is probably the biggest one, is they lead you into the next section, whatever that is. So they can really help create a transition from the soloist into whatever is happening next. As you are writing backgrounds, one thing you'll want to think about is you kind of want to imagine where a soloist might want to go with their solo. And then you want to write something that's going to accompany the solo you imagine. So it's kind of like using ESP. If you've ever played with a great drummer, that's like one of their amazing skills. Like when I've gotten to play with like Billy Hart, I always feel like he knows where my solo is going before I even know. And he's kind of almost conducting. So I never feel like he's pushing me in some direction I don't want to go. But he can kind of see where it's going and knows how to light the stage, light the path for me to get there as a soloist, as an improviser, and as an arranger. You want to sort of do the same thing with your backgrounds. Is you want to imagine where a soloist would want to go, and then lead them there in a way that feels natural to them. And in terms of who is best at this, I know this isn't combo, this is big band, but for writing backgrounds, I think Maria Schneider is the most amazing at just hearing where a soloist wants to go and creating backgrounds that seem to just work perfectly with where a soloist would want to go. They sound, and part of it is her soloists know what the backgrounds are, and so they're crafting these solos that work with the backgrounds, but they just feel so seamless. And even though they had to be notated in advance because they're backgrounds, that they have to be that way, it feels so organic and natural, like they were just destined to do that. And it's so intertwined. It's like hard. It's almost like, where does the improvisation stop and the predetermined composition begin? They feel so naturally intertwined, and that's what we're going for with backgrounds. So if you want, check out some Maria Schneider for her backgrounds and the way she shapes a solo. Right? She just is incredible at just giving a soloist the right amount of direction and yet the right amount of freedom, and letting it just create a whole world in itself. It's the way Vince Mendoza talks about it is like, the soloist is, you're writing the book as the arranger, you're writing the book, but you are letting your soloist write a chapter in it. And so you want to set them up to write that chapter in the book. Okay, so just some details about backgrounds. A few common types of backgrounds. One is unison or octave lines. That can sound really nice, and it can be nice and simple, which is, it's going to help stay out of the way of the soloist. So especially if you've got like some sort of line with some motion in it, unison can be real nice, or octaves. Another way to do it is harmonized lines. So it's just like unison lines, but it's going to be in harmony. And generally, you're going to be writing two-part harmony for your background lines when you've got. So I should say this: when we're dealing with three horns, we usually are only going to write two-part harmony for the backgrounds, because one of the horns is the soloist. Now, of course, the exception to this is if you are writing your background specifically for a rhythm section solo. So if you're writing for a piano solo, you're writing backgrounds for the piano solo, then yes, you can use all three horns in harmony for the backgrounds. But if you are writing backgrounds for a trumpet solo, then it's going to be the the saxophone and trombone in this case that will be playing backgrounds, and the trumpet will be playing the solo. So keep that in mind. Even though you've got three horns, you generally are going to be leaving one free to improvise. If you're writing like, and that's the same. The last thing is pads. That's more like whole notes or long tones that go with the chord changes and are generally harmonized. And again, it's going to be two-part harmony while the third person is improvising. And the exception is if you're writing for piano solo or bass solo, then you can have all three horns playing in harmony, because the improvising melody is going to be coming from piano or bass, or drums. That would be interesting if you like. You could do that. So those are probably those are the common types of backgrounds. Now let's see, if you're writing like a solo section with a repeat, right, and so multiple instruments are going to be soloing over that section, and you want backgrounds, then you probably are first of all gonna, if it's for a band of three horns, you're gonna do two-part backgrounds is what you're gonna write. Now, generally, in your highest voice, you only need to write the top note of the background if it's harmonized. So you write the highest note, the top note. In our case, for this chart, that'll be the trumpet. So they'll only get the high note of the harmony. And then our lowest voice is going to get the bottom note. So in the case of the charts you're writing right now, that's your trombone. So they only need the bottom note. Now, the saxophone is in the middle. So you're generally going to give the middle voice, you give them both parts. So the top notes, you put the stems going upward, and the bottom notes, the stems go downward. And I'm going to actually on this screen, I'll post an example of that from one of my charts. And I'll send you a link to a score to this chart. This is from a chart of mine called Before You Know It. And so it has kind of an open solo section, and there's backgrounds in it that are, two-part. And you'll see the trumpet has the top voice, in the case of that chart, the bottom voice, which is tenor saxophone for that chart, has the bottom notes. And then the middle voice, which is alto saxophone, has top and bottom, and the top is stems up, the bottom is stems down. So they can see both. And so that means if the trumpet's improvising, then the alto sax plays the top note. If the tenor sax is improvising, then the alto sax plays the bottom note. And it's also easier if this is too much. It's okay to just give everyone both notes. I just sometimes don't do that because it can get a little, it can sit outside their ranges is often the case. Like a lot of times the note that fits in the trumpet doesn't fit in the trombone. And it can just get kind of tougher for them to read. You also will want to, especially if it's an open, this is talking about a repeated kind of open solo section, you'll want to write chord changes above the backgrounds so that when someone's soloing, they can keep up with where they're at in the form. Anyway, check out the Before You Know It chart to see what I'm talking about. And again, I'm flashing it on the screen. I think that is it. That's covering everything I can think of. And I will send these notes that I'm using, my lecture notes. I'll include these in the email. And please let me know what questions you have. I'm excited to see what you're doing. And I love getting to watch how your charts are progressing and watch you guys work through this creative process. Please do email me and keep in touch with me over the course of the week, so that you're on track. All right, guys, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.